It is easy to believe that loss ruins us. We tend to frame it as a destructive event, a wall we crash into. Yet most of the time, loss simply pulls back the curtain on what we have carried for years. The grief is absolutely real, the shock is real, but what rises to the surface is often the oldest, most tightly held part of us that has been waiting, maybe even begging, to be seen and finally released. And I want to invite you right now, just as you're listening to us talk about this, just to notice what your body's doing. You don't have to change a thing, just observe. Is there maybe a tension you hadn't noticed? Are your shoulders creeping up toward your ears? Is your breath sort of caught high in your chest? Because endings, whether they're really dramatic like a sudden job loss or quiet like the silence of an empty home, they don't just take something away. They are a profound disturbance. They turn on a spotlight on the ancient nervous system patterns that were running us, patterns that were often completely invisible when life felt stable. The external scaffolding has fallen, and now finally we get to see the underlying foundation, or, the lack thereof.
And that recognition right there, that collapse of the external structure, that is the crucial context for this entire deep dive. We're exploring the unexpected mercy of loss. It's an arrival that's uninvited, for sure, but it strips away all the illusions of external control, and it forces us to hear the body's deeply honest, ancient language. When the external comfort, the relationship, the title, the capacity, when that's gone, the coping architecture we built around it just collapses.
Right.
And suddenly we're face to face with what we've been holding on to, sometimes for decades, because the body, it never forgets.
This whole conversation, it's really inspired by an insightful written piece called What Loss Reveals, and it was penned by Helen Rodiba. Her work just captures that profound, precise moment when what we thought we needed, that anchor of stability outside ourselves, just falls away. And what we actually require begins to surface, which is inner sovereignty. It's such a powerful distinction, moving from dependence to self-agency.
It is. And to help us map these complex internal revelations, we're going to use the structure of the pathway to sovereignty. Now, for those listeners who are joining us for the first time or maybe just need a quick reminder, this framework describes 6 nonlinear levels. They are survival, stability, self-awareness, integrity, wholeness, and freedom. And these aren't grades you climb out of or anything. They map how the nervous system responds to shock and then gradually, in a spiral, returns to inner agency. It's so essential to stress that these are not linear steps toward some perfect destination. They're more like rhythms or territories that we spiral through, integrating lessons each time we revisit them as life, inevitably throws its curveballs.
Yeah, and I think we need to spend some real time unpacking these levels first, because if you understand the framework, you're really understanding the map of your own healing journey. When we talk about these levels being territories, it really highlights that they reveal a deeper layer of truth about who we are beneath what we do or what we achieve. We don't graduate from them. We gain more resources to navigate them the next time they come up.
Exactly. And the first 3 levels they're absolutely foundational. They deal primarily with regulation and recognition, and those are the necessary prerequisites for any deep transformation. So let's start at the very beginning. At survival, this is the emergency response. The nervous system is asking the most primal question there is.
Am I safe?
Am I safe? When a significant loss hits, whether it's a job, a person, or some external structure, the psychological scaffolding just collapses. And the body reacts as if it's in physical danger, even if the loss is purely, conceptual.
So if you're listening and you've suddenly realized your sense of self was tied entirely to a job that's now gone, what is the mechanism in survival? I mean, it feels like panic, but what's happening biologically?
That is a critical question. When the mind perceives that kind of existential threat, the loss of worth or security or belonging, the deep ancient parts of the brain, the limbic system, they activate the sympathetic nervous system. This is the body's hardwired fight, flight, freeze response.
Right.
So cortisol and adrenaline just surge. And this isn't theoretical. This is why we feel the physical sensations we hear described in all these cases. The chest tightening, the shortness of breath, the hollowness, that hot spike of panic, or even the sudden absolute coldness of dissociation.
So the work here, as you said earlier, is deceptively simple. It's staying with what is happening without immediately defaulting to running away or fixing it or numbing the pain.
Precisely. The work in survival is simple, but it is not easy. It's about bearing witness to those sensations without judgment. We just name them. Tightness, hollow, panic, cold. The ultimate goal here is to prove to your nervous system, moment by moment, that the sensation, however intense it is survivable. It's not about making the feeling go away, because the body needs to discharge that stored energy. It's simply about saying, I see you, You are intense, but I am still here.
And if you can manage that just to stay present in survival, even for short bursts, I mean, maybe 30 seconds at a time,
Yeah.
you start creating these little windows,
Nice.
right? And that allows you to move towards stability. And this level isn't about perfection. It just shows us that we can regulate and resource ourselves.
Yes, and it's so crucial to clarify that stability is not a destination where dysregulation stops.
Yeah.
That's an impossible standard. Stability just means you have the tools to reliably return to regulation when you inevitably get thrown off balance. This is where we deliberately introduce small, predictable anchors to reassure the nervous system.
I find this so fascinating because in a crisis, the mind wants these big solutions, a new relationship, a new job, a massive life change. But stability, it relies on tiny, often physical acts.
Absolutely. Think of breath work, grounding practices,
Mhm.
using your five senses. Like the warmth of a mug in your hand, or the feeling of your feet flat on the floor, or the sound of your own steady four-count breath.
Mhm.
These aren't distractions, they are physiological signals. When the body registers these small anchors, it can move out of that high alert of the sympathetic system and slightly activate the ventral vagal complex. That's the part that says, I am safe enough to connect and rest.
Wow.
It's knowing how to support your nervous system back to a place of choice rather than just raw primal reaction.
And once that regulation is consistently available, once the nervous system has a moment of quiet, that's when we can access the next territory, self-awareness.
Yes. Self-awareness is where the light goes on. The nervous system is quiet enough that the mind can finally see the deeply entrenched patterns that have been running us, the unconscious beliefs that dictated our responses to the loss. This is the moment of recognition, the true deep dive into the self.
And this is where the vulnerability hits hard, isn't it? Because we realize we were complicit in the structure that caused the suffering. We realize, I built my entire identity on external approval, or I systematically shut down every time I felt vulnerable. This isn't about blaming ourselves, but it's about a factual recognition of the architecture we built.
Precisely. It's recognizing the adaptive strategies we developed as children to survive our environment. Conditional love, performance, compliance, and realizing they have become maladaptive constraints in adulthood. And that recognition is where we reclaim agency, because once you see the pattern, you can begin to choose differently rather than just reacting on autopilot. Survival, stability, and self-awareness. They form this initial recovery phase. But the power of loss, as we're about to see in these stories, is that it acts as the catalyst to expose those patterns and move people toward integrity and freedom.
Okay, let's begin with Rose. She's a 32-year-old in Amsterdam, and her story really illustrates the collapse of external worth. Her loss wasn't some dramatic car crash or a firing. It was a non-dramatic breakup after 3 years. Her partner simply said it was over, and the relationship, as she put it, just stopped breathing. And you might expect profound sadness, but the overwhelming shock that hit Rose was pure, paralyzing terror.
Right, and that separation between the external event and the internal reaction is the first clue that the loss isn't the problem, it's the mirror. The breakup was the trigger, but her body reacted as if she'd lost her footing at a cliff edge. The article describes her chest tightening, like a band of iron pulling inward from her sternum to her spine. Her breath became these shallow sips, barely even registering. She was thrown immediately into that primitive survival mode.
And that terror, it manifested in compulsive behaviors that were trying to reassure the deep core of her that she still existed. She was checking her phone constantly, scrolling through old messages looking for proof that she still existed. This is so common, that frantic search for an external anchor when the internal one is missing.
That's the key distinction right there. She wasn't looking for proof of love. She was looking for proof of self through external validation. And the core revelation, her moment of self-awareness, was deeply insightful. She realized she did not miss him as much as she missed the feeling of being chosen. The relationship was just scaffolding for her worth. The loss only revealed how hollow her foundation was beneath that external structure.
And this applies so far beyond breakups, doesn't it? It's that gut-wrenching, hollow feeling when the job, the title, the social group, or the family role that defined you suddenly ends. The nervous system doesn't really distinguish the form of validation. If your identity is predicated on being needed or wanted, the loss of that external signal is processed as an existential threat.
Precisely. And this is where the modality she used, somatic attachment work, was so crucial. For those unfamiliar, somatic attachment work is a therapeutic approach where we trace adult, emotional, and relational patterns by observing how those patterns manifest as physical sensations in the present. We recognize that the body holds the history of our earliest relational bonds. And Rose, through this work, traced that terror and the need to be chosen back to a powerful childhood pattern.
So how did that early pattern show up for her?
Well, love had been conditional in her early life. Safety was earned through performance and compliance. So when her partner left and this silence ensued, her body equated that silence with childhood abandonment. Her nervous system had organized itself around this ironclad equation. If I am chosen, I am safe. If I am not chosen, I will disappear. The breakup didn't create this intense vulnerability. It was simply the mirror that perfectly reflected it back to her, forcing her to confront it.
And the messy middle of this work is where most people quit. I mean, Rose had a period of intense resistance. She quit therapy because her therapist asked her to simply notice the suffocating chest tightness, the very thing she wanted to escape. She walked out, convinced that therapy was making it worse, because sitting with that discomfort just felt unbearable.
That is the mind's natural defense mechanism trying to maintain the status quo. I mean, if you feel the pain, you might have to change, and change is perceived as a threat. She tried to move on the way we're culturally programmed to, dating, new classes, a trip, but the hollow feeling followed her everywhere because the discomfort was internal, not external.
So what broke the dam? What was the turning point?
It was the simple act of external witness from her friend Maya, who noticed Rose was physically present, but completely somewhere else, replaying the scenario, stuck in the past. That gentle observation, that moment of external presence, allowed the internal dam to break. Rose realized she wasn't just grieving the loss, she was resisting the present.
And her return to presence was through breath-based regulation, which is what moved her into stability. She stopped trying to fix the panic, which is impossible, and started observing it, using her breath as an anchor.
Yes, and she began to recognize the specific texture of her panic. She described it as rough, like sandpaper against the inside of her ribs. It was cold and concentrated specifically in her solar plexus. By tracking its rhythm, not running from it, allowing it to peak and crest and eventually soften, she taught her nervous system a new, profound truth. The sensation of panic, however overwhelming, is temporary, and I can be with it.
That's the grace, isn't it? The shift wasn't in eliminating the pain, it was in changing her relationship to the pain. She stayed present until the sensation softened naturally, and her movement toward wholeness and freedom was quiet. It wasn't about rushing to find someone new. It was the discovery that she could fully inhabit her life, alone, in uncertainty, without collapsing. She learned to be chosen by herself, closing that gap of internal abandonment.
And that self-selection is the definition of inner agency. She moved from the primal equation, if I am chosen, I am safe, to the sovereign reality, I am safe because I choose to be present with myself.
Okay, now we shift gears completely. We're moving from the relational loss of Rose to the profound identity loss experienced by Aidan. He's a 38-year-old musician in Dublin. And for him, music was his language, his structure, his entire way of making sense of life. When a severe ear infection caused him to temporarily lose his hearing, his world didn't just quiet down, it fractured.
This kind of loss of capacity, loss of function, is a direct, brutal assault on the ego. Aidan's first territory was pure, unadulterated survival. The internal silence meant his mind became the loudest, most aggressive thing in his life. Anxiety surged. Thoughts just spiraled into catastrophe. He felt the panic physically. It lived in his throat, a sensation of choking. His hands shook uncontrollably. His vision narrowed. He literally could only think about surviving the next hour without breaking down.
The loss of hearing was effectively the loss of his identity structure, wasn't it? I mean, he had spent years translating the messy, chaotic world into organized sound, and suddenly the translation device was broken. That feeling of free fall when the thing that structures your purpose is gone, that's universal, whether it's music, athletic performance, or intellectual capacity.
And his resistance was a beautiful example of our mind trying to outsmart the body. When his friend Maeve suggested meditation, Aidan responded with utter disdain. He said, I'm a musician, I need sound, meditation is just more fucking silence. He was terrified of the internal void.
That's such an illuminating moment. He was trying to resist silence with more noise, the noise of his own internal critique and his spiraling thoughts.
Exactly. But desperation, as it so often does, proved to be the greatest motivator. He tried mindfulness purely because the alternative, just lying in bed with his mind screaming at him, was a torture he couldn't sustain.
And against his initial will, he stumbled into stability. In the forced absence of external sound, he started noticing these tiny, reliable internal rhythms that he had ignored his entire life because he was so focused on grand compositions.
He noticed the faint pulse in his wrists, the creak of the floorboards in his old Dublin apartment, the rhythm of his own breath, which was uneven at first but reliable. These tiny somatic anchors told his system, I am still solid, I'm still present, the world is moving, even if I cannot hear it move. This was crucial. It was tangible, undeniable evidence of aliveness that wasn't dependent on his craft.
And this forced introspection, it naturally propelled him into self-awareness. So what did the silence reveal about the architecture of his purpose?
He realized he had been so busy translating the world into music, always performing, always producing, that he had forgotten how to simply look at it or feel it. The silence forced him inward, revealing a stark truth. His sense of worth felt entirely erased without his craft. The universal pattern was exposed. If you are defined entirely by what you do, you are terrified when you can no longer do it perfectly. He had treated his capacity as his identity.
So when his hearing eventually returned, though unevenly and with a persistent tinnitus, the change in his approach to his craft was the definition of integrity. He started composing differently, focusing now on the spaces between notes, the moments of silence and pause that actually structure the sound.
That is such a profound physical manifestation of an internal change. He wasn't seeking perfect pitch anymore. He recognized that what he was chasing was a quality of attention, a presence, a deep absorption, not perfect sound. His modalities, which included mindfulness-based stress reduction and creative embodiment, they weren't about fixing his ears. They were about deepening his internal relationship to rhythm and presence.
So he moved toward wholeness and freedom when he realized he was no longer defined by what he could hear, but by his capacity to pay attention and be present.
Absolutely. His ultimate freedom was the music felt through his chest and bones, the rhythm of his own existence that persisted, regardless of external validation or even physical capacity. He learned to listen beneath the sound, finding the hum of aliveness that precedes all external manifestation.
Okay, so we've seen relational loss and capacity loss. Now let's look at the collapse of structured external roles, which can be just as devastating because they create such rigid internal structures. We start with Farah, 47, in Kuala Lumpur. Her loss was the empty nest. Her children left for university, and the sudden, persistent silence in her home was utterly disorienting.
For Farah, her identity was motherhood. Her body had been wired for constant vigilance, trained by 25 years of anticipating needs, solving problems, and being perpetually available. Her nervous system had equated rest with selfishness. Her entire value structure came from giving and being necessary.
So, when the object of that vigilance disappeared, her nervous system couldn't just switch off. What happened when she was left with that terrifying question? Who am I when I am not needed?
Her body just didn't know what to do with the lack of threat. She went into this highly activated state that looked like productivity, but was really just frantic avoidance. She was cleaning obsessively, trying to fill the hours and the rooms with activity, but the deep loneliness lived in her solar plexus as a hollow ache. It wasn't the sharp pain of grief. It was the absence, the physical sensation of not being essential anymore. And this kept her stuck somewhere between survival and stability.
Her journey into self-awareness was full of resistance, which is such a common pattern when an external role is stripped away. If the structure is gone, the person fights to rebuild it immediately, rather than look at the empty space.
Precisely. When a friend suggested expressive art therapy, she just scoffed. I haven't drawn since primary school. That's for children. But the true moment of breakthrough wasn't internal. It came when her daughter, who called frequently, pointed out the painful truth. She said, "Mom, you sound like you're sad, and you're just waiting for us to need you again." That feedback forced her to face the pattern. She was defining her future by waiting for her past purpose to return.
Can you explain what expressive art therapy is exactly in this context?
Yeah, so expressive art therapy is about using creative processes, drawing, painting, sculpting, not to create something beautiful, but to externalize and process internal emotional states that words can't always reach. It bypasses the analytical mind, and it speaks directly to the nervous system. Farah resisted it because she feared incompetence, which mirrored her fear of being useless.
But she did eventually return to the canvas.
She did. Her first paintings were, by her own description, terrible. Just brown and gray smudges reflecting the bleakness and emotional flatness she felt. But gradually, as she let go of the need for perfection and simply channeled the feeling of being unneeded, she transitioned to chaotic, messy, intensely alive colors, vibrant reds, chaotic yellows. That shift was a profound movement toward wholeness.
That's a powerful visual metaphor. The modalities she used, gentle yoga and expressive art therapy, they taught her nervous system that stillness was not the same as stagnation and that rest was not selfishness.
She learned that the emptiness of the home was not a void, but it was actually space to reclaim herself. She began to transition from her identity as only a caretaker to an identity as a whole person with creative vitality, discovering abandoned parts of herself she hadn't touched since childhood.
Now let's turn to Jonas, the Stockholm strategist. His scaffolding wasn't a family role, but achievement and relentless progress. When he was passed over for a promotion he'd been working toward for 2 years, the loss led not to collapse, but to extreme intensification.
This intensification is a classic productivity pattern, often rooted in conditional worth. Rather than slowing down to grieve the loss, he interpreted the failure as undeniable evidence that he needed to try harder, faster, and longer. His core unconscious belief was, I am only worthy when I am producing, performing, succeeding.
That just sounds exhausting.
It was. He pushed through escalating symptoms, chronic insomnia, persistent headaches, and profound exhaustion. He was overriding every single biological signal until his body finally staged a revolt through debilitating panic attacks, forcing him right into survival territory. He was in a constant state of internal war, destroying himself for an external marker of worth that was now permanently out of reach.
His partner, Elsa, provided the intervention, which was a clear statement of truth. You are destroying yourself for a job that does not love you back. That external observation provided the shock required for his self-awareness moment.
Yes. That statement just shattered his illusion that the struggle was noble. It opened the doorway to seeking help through cognitive somatic coaching. Now, this type of coaching specifically addresses how thinking patterns, the cognitive part, are directly tied to physical manifestations and nervous system states, the somatic part. His coach, Ingrid, didn't talk strategy or productivity. She asked him to describe the sensation when he thought about the promotion.
And what did he describe?
He described a metal, cold band wrapping tightly around his chest. Ingrid, using somatic inquiry, asked what that band would say if it could speak. And the quiet whisper underneath all the striving and achievement was finally heard. I'm afraid I'm not enough, acknowledging that deep primal fear that self-doubt was everything.
That vulnerability was his first step toward integrity. He began to untangle decades of conditional love messages tied to academic and professional success. And integrity, in this context, meant acknowledging the true physical cost of his striving and choosing the self over the output.
His return to stability came through specific grounding practices, simple things. Pausing to soften his jaw and shoulders when he caught himself clenching, mindful pauses throughout the day, and running. But running to discharge the stress response, not to train for a race or achieve a time. He used his body to regulate, rather than using his mind to analyze.
And his ultimate move to wholeness and freedom.
He achieved it when he sat in a cafe, doing absolutely nothing, and felt genuinely fine. His worth was no longer earned through suffering or output. He realized his worth was inherent, regardless of his title, his performance, or his professional trajectory. He had exchanged the exhausting grip of striving for the grounding simplicity of peace.
So if we synthesize these four powerful journeys, Rose, Aidan, Farah, and Jonas, the common thread is undeniably clear. Every single person believed the loss was the cause of their intense suffering, whether it was the breakup, the hearing loss, the empty nest, or the failed promotion. But the loss was only the doorway. It revealed what was already stored and tightly held inside their nervous system.
It showed Rose the deep relational need for self-presence. Aidan found his core aliveness and the capacity for internal attention. Farah reclaimed her messy, chaotic, creative vitality. And Jonas found peace and recognized his inherent worth.
And this brings us back to what Helen Mudibo wrote about in her piece. Loss strips away the external scaffolding so that sovereignty, true internal agency, can finally begin.
And we really must talk about the nature of this scaffolding, this architecture of protection. The patterns we saw, Rose monitoring moods for safety, Jonas channeling everything into output, Farah equating value with being needed, these were once incredibly adaptive strategies. They helped them survive environments where belonging or safety was conditional. But these patterns continued to run long after the original threat was gone. The body, brilliant at protection, simply forgot to update its threat detection system for its adult reality.
That's the challenge. How do you convince an ancient protective part of you that what kept you safe at 5 years old is now destroying you at 35?
It happens through repeated practice and exposure, which is what the higher levels of the pathway to sovereignty are all about. Let's connect the stories explicitly back to those transforming territories that follow self-awareness.
Okay, let's start with integrity. This is where the rubber meets the road. It's the aligning of actions with deeper knowing, even when it's uncomfortable.
For Rose, integrity meant returning to therapy and choosing vulnerability over comfort, even though the tightness in her chest was unbearable. She had to act against the impulse to run. For Jonas, it was a drastic shift. facing the truth that his career path was literally destroying him and choosing rest over relentless performance, which, for a high achiever, is often perceived as professional suicide. Integrity demands that you close the gap between who you present yourself to be and who you actually are, even if that disappoints others or compromises your external status.
I think the most challenging part of integrity is that it requires choosing the long-term, true self over the short-term, protected self.
Absolutely. And when you choose integrity consistently, you begin to experience wholeness. This is the beautiful, non-fragmented result. It's reclaiming the abandoned parts of yourself that the survival patterns demanded you suppress.
Like Farah, whose creativity came rushing back, realizing she wasn't just a mother, but an artist, a woman with her own internal landscape.
Exactly. Or Aidan, who embraced the silence, making it an integrated part of his music rather than the enemy of his craft. Wholeness doesn't mean being fixed or painless. It means holding all the necessary paradoxes, the ambition and the contentment, the grief and the gratitude, without constant internal warfare. You are no longer fragmented into acceptable and unacceptable parts.
And finally, we reach freedom. And this is often misinterpreted as a state of bliss, but it's far more practical than that.
Freedom is not a static destination. It is a relational capacity. It is the ability to respond to life, to triggers, to difficult news, rather than automatically reacting. You choose actions from alignment rather than from fear. Rose can enter a new relationship from wholeness, not need. Jonas can work hard without his worth being dependent on the outcome. Freedom is available in any moment you remember you have a choice to pause and ask, what is true right now and what action aligns with my deepest truth?
The essential lesson here is that you don't climb the path, you spiral through it. You may achieve a moment of profound freedom one day, only to be back in survival the next morning when a stressful email hits your inbox.
That is the nature of a living human nervous system. But each time you spiral back, you have more resources and more awareness with you. You spend less time in the fight-flight-freeze cycle. The practice is compassionately recognizing which territory you are in and applying the resources of stability, the breath, the feet on the floor, to support yourself back towards self-awareness and choice. That is true sovereignty. So we want to leave you with 2 reflection questions, right here, right now. No need to answer them immediately. Just let them resonate in your body. Notice what shifts internally when you hear them. What did your last ending, whether it was a job, a friendship, a capacity, or a relationship, truly reveal about what you've been carrying? And what does your body fear will happen if you stop holding on so tightly to that protective pattern? The body remembers what the mind tries so desperately to outrun. When you stop trying to fix the situation and instead learn to listen, not to judge or to change, but simply to witness the internal state, the tension softens, the architecture of protection can finally relax, and something new, something intrinsically valuable becomes possible.
If these stories resonated with you, especially the deep need for internal grounding and moving past the grip of the survival state, we do have a free resource available for you. It's a guided meditation called Say Yes to Your Body.
And we should probably clarify what saying yes means in this context. It does not mean you are happy about the pain or that you want the pain to stay. It means you are ready to stop fighting what is here. It means allowing what is here, the tightness, the hollow ache, the raw fear, to be met with gentleness and curiosity. This allows the body to release what it no longer needs in its own time, because resistance is what binds the energy inside. It's about practicing the art of being with yourself exactly as you are, creating the safety that allows for release.
And if you are ready to deepen this work, especially as you rebuild after a significant loss or a difficult ending, we invite you to explore the 21-day journal, Your Path Forward After a Difficult Ending.
This journal provides structured daily prompts and inquiry designed to support your daily integration. It helps you navigate the complex emotional terrain while rebuilding trust in yourself, finding new meaning, and establishing that crucial inner steadiness we talked about, the foundation of stability. The focus is on creating the conditions where healing can happen naturally, one question, one day, and one moment of quiet listening at a time.
Endings are not walls. They are mirrors, showing you exactly where your deepest truths lie. And on the other side of that reflection, freedom waits.
Climb the staircase, breath by breath, with compassion and presence we rise from stress, from fear to peace, from shame to grace. Climb the staircase to sovereignty. When you feel unsafe, too much to bear, you shut down or flare, you vanish or glare, your heart beats fast, your breath runs tight, you just want